interagency collaboration and policy formulation. I have some administrative announcements to get us started today. First, I'm going to discuss three different sectors, civil society being the first. We have a Global Coalition Civil Society Forum, which will be hosted by the Vienna NGO Committee in collaboration with the New York NGO Committee, scheduled for the 1st of February in two sessions, 9 to 11 in the morning and 4 to 6 in the afternoon, Central European time. All of you, coalition governments, are encouraged to attend and to listen from civil society, their views. Those recordings will also be posted on our website. Second, we are now entering the phase of national dialogues on the Global Coalition between governments and civil society organizations. Today, in a few hours, the United States will host its U.S. Civil Society Forum on the Coalition, hosted by the White House Office of National Drug Control Policy. We have shared with civil society members background on the coalition and are inviting them to deliver statements. This event will also be recorded and posted on the website. Likewise, we would like to invite you, governments, to host your own national meetings with your own national civil society organizations to discuss the global coalitions and synthetic drugs, and share those recordings or summaries with us, and we will also post those on our website. Finally, the Vienna NGO Committee will also be working with us to collect additional feedback and recommendations from civil society members, and we will make those available to you once again through the website. So this is the first sector, which is civil society. The second sector is the university sector. I'd like to introduce ICU DDR, which is the International Consortium of Universities for Drug Demand Reduction. This is an NGO that was established in 2016 with funding from INL and has 422 universities from around the world as members. This organization will convene universities to reflect on the challenges of synthetic drugs and to provide us with research, policy ideas, and programming recommendations. While this organization focuses on drug demand reduction, for the purposes of the coalition, they will take on all three thematic topics and be looking for academia to provide input and discussions on the three sectors. The activities will be three. First phase will be regional focus group virtual meetings in 6 regions of the world between February and March. Those will be Africa, Asia and the Pacific, Europe, Latin America and the Caribbean, the Middle East, and the US and Canada. The goal will be to develop recommendations and prepare a report for all of you. Next, once again, ICUDDR will host 6 regional virtual meetings in the regions that I've described. This time, not just universities, but also governments. So there will be a dialogue between both sectors to discuss the recommendations and to incorporate the views of government representatives. Once again, a report will be developed for coalition members. This will be April to June. And finally, in June, ICUDDR will conduct an inventory of university initiatives that can be supported through the Global Coalition's work, and those will also be documented on the website. The third sector is the private sector. We are currently developing the engagement plan for the private sector, and that will be shared with co-chairs and with all of you, and then presented at the next session under administrative announcements. A couple more announcements. The coalition website continues to grow. There is a new communication feature that will be going live soon, which will allow you to participate in sharing content similar to LinkedIn, Facebook, or YouTube. It will go live in February, but because it is a posting process, it will require account activation from all of the coalition participants. So in the coming weeks, please look out for an email that will be inviting you to create an account on this website so that you can post content. It will be the same email that you use to register for the coalition. We welcome you to share news, experiences, articles, videos on the website. But most importantly, we're looking for recommendations for the coalition's work moving forward. So we're very eager to receive your recommendations through that posting mechanism. Here is a screenshot of what it may look like, where you can, again, see the text box, post, reply to other submissions, etc. My final announcement for today is to share with you the way forward over the coming months and this idea of initiatives and pledges. Initiatives can be programs, actions, or policies, We've asked the international organizations throughout the months of December and January to send to us different initiatives that we could share with all of you. And we have a wonderful library that we've received with over 120 initiatives from international organizations throughout the full spectrum of all of the sub-working groups. We are now reviewing and polishing those, and they will go on the coalition website in the coming weeks for you all to look at. What does an initiative look like? For example, we have the title of the initiative or project, a brief description, background documentation like a video or document, accomplishments to date, if the initiative has already started, program activities, and sort of the steps in executing the activity via the program, outcomes at the global and national level, the names of any countries that are currently participating if it's an ongoing initiative, and the point of contact. If you are interested in participating, we are asking that you email the point of contact for that initiative and register your personal interest in representation of your country or your agency to participate in these initiatives. So during the months of February and March, we're asking all of you to review these items and to express interest and to express interest by contacting specifically those email addresses for the corresponding points of contact. During the month of March, we will have more opportunities to discuss these initiatives at the Commission on Narcotic Drugs. I think many of you are going in Vienna for that meeting. And then the implementation phase begins between April to July. So one final announcement is, before I wrap up, is the recommendations, which we're also looking at for the coalition's work. We have reviewed the topics from these monthly meetings, beginning in November through February, what's programmed in terms of thematic topics that are being covered. From that, we are trying to develop a draft list of recommendations. Throughout the month of February, we will be sharing those recommendations with co-chairs, and we'll be posting it on the website for all of you to read and reflect on it, so that on March 6th and 7th, we will host a meeting of the working groups. And the working group co-chairs will receive reports from the sub-working group co-chairs in terms of what progress has been made with the coalition and what the recommendations are for each of the different sub-working groups. So we look forward to your input at that stage, but also following that, as we post the recommendations on the website, we will also have that function, that feature that I just showed you about posting, where you will be able to continue to provide recommendations that we will continue to collect and share on the website as well. So that is a long list of administrative announcements from me today. Thank you very much. I would now like to turn it over to Clara Mall and Jenny Fagua, our co-chairs for Working Group 2.2, to get us started. Thank you very much.
Many thanks, Brian. Very helpful and good to see all of that set out for the months to come. Welcome everybody, and hope you're well. Our first presentation is live today, and then I think our second one is recorded. Pleased to introduce Conor from the UNODC to talk through legislative responses.
Thank you, Claire. Good afternoon, everybody. Let me just share my screen.
And we
can you see that okay?
Yes, we can see your screen okay. Thank you very much. If you could speak a little bit closer to your device. Thank you.
Sure. Perfect. Thank you, Cyril. So today I thought I would give you some information about legislative responses to synthetic drugs, both from the perspective of what we do here within UNODC at the international level, and also with the experience that we have learned through the emergence of NPS in the last 15 years with regard to legislative responses of member states at the national level. I thought I would start off with showing you this map, which shows the global emergence of NPS that we have as of today. So currently over 1,230 substances have been reported by member states. But primarily I wanted to show you this to show you the difference between the number of substances that have been reported by different countries. So we can see from this that this means that the darker the color, the larger the number of substances that have been reported. The legislative responses that are required by member states are probably dictated by the situation that they see in their country. So if the situation in countries is very, very different, the actual response that they may need to put in place needs to be adjusted based on their national experience. So what we have seen in terms of different legislation that has been put in place definitely reflects this situation in terms of the spread of substances and the number of substances that have been reported by different countries. To give you an introduction of what we do at the international level, so particularly within the 1961 and 1971 conventions, which looks at narcotic drugs and psychotropic substances. Scheduling at the international level is done substance by substance. And the body that's involved in the scientific review of substances to see should they be considered for scheduling is the Expert Committee of Drug Dependence of the World Health Organization. So you can see that from this slide that the text shows that this committee consists of an independent group of experts in various fields of drugs and medicines who assess potential health risks and benefits of the use of psychoactive substances according to a fixed set of criteria. So these are in bold evidence of the dependence potential of a substance, actual abuse and or evidence of the likelihood of abuse, and therapeutic applications of a substance. So is the substance available or used as a medicine? So the committee meets once a year, and following its evaluation of critical review of substances, it each of the last 9 years has proposed recommendations that then get sent to from the Director General of WHO to the Secretary General of the United Nations. And then these recommendations get considered annually at the Commission on Narcotic Drugs here in Vienna, and then they're voted upon by member states for decision on whether to include the substances in the conventions. If you talk about 1,200 substances that have emerged worldwide, in the last 9 years, 78 of these substances have been included in the International Drug Conventions, and you can see from this slide the different breakdown of what those substances are in terms of the different groups of substances that have emerged and then been placed under international control, and also an idea of in which schedule and convention the substances have been scheduled. So the largest group of substances that have been scheduled are synthetic opioids, followed by synthetic cannabinoids and stimulants, and this is since 2014. And you may ask, of 1,230 substances, why only 78 have been scheduled? And that is because these are the substances that have been assessed, and the evidence does exist that they meet the criteria for scheduling at the international level. So this is the reason why, as part of the UN General Assembly Special Session on Drugs in 2016, the idea was to prioritize the most persistent, prevalent, and harmful substances for international scheduling. And this is why you see synthetic opioids as the substance group that has the most substances scheduled in the last 9 years. As I said, the national situation is different. Member states have their own position to adopt different legislation depending on what the situation is within their country. Over the years, we've compiled an analysis of the different types of legislation that have been used from member states, and these are all accessible within a specific module of the UN Toolkit on Synthetic Drugs, and you can access that through this QR code that's present in this slide. I'll go into the legal module a little bit just to show you what information is there and what resources are available for you to see what legislative responses have been taken. So within this, we have a list of the different types of legislative approaches that have been used by member states, primarily in response to synthetic drugs in the last 10 years. And these include individual listing, like the United Nations Drug Conventions, temporary bans, rapid procedures, generic legislation, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a minute, analog control legislation, specific NPS legislation, as well as other national laws that have been used by member states. So in particular, for each type of legislation for which we have information, there is a description of what that type of legislation involves. So this example to show you the language that we have included in the module related to generic legislation. So this involves the definition of a core structure of a group of molecules, and then certain derivatives of this that are then also included within legislation. We've given an example here marked in the yellow box showing some language that was used maybe back in 2008 or 2009 with regard to defining a core of synthetic cannabinoid group. So a number of countries in Europe at the time started to use definition of different groups of synthetic cannabinoids, and other countries, as a result of the evolution of synthetic cannabinoids over the number of years, have looked at taking these core definitions and then expanding them to cover new evolutions of substance groups based on slightly different cores or modification to cores. And one might say that potentially the emergence of the diversity of synthetic cannabinoids could also be linked to the attempts to bypass these definitions of generic legislation. So it's an approach that's used by a number of countries, and the toolkit module gives you some information on what considerations you as a member state may need to consider if you wanted to adopt such type of legislation. So do you have a large number of substances that have emerged? Do you have the resources within your forensic infrastructure, forensic services to be able to implement control at a generic level? So there's a lot of information here that's provided on each of the different types of legislation. There's also a resource to be able to search what type of legislation has been adopted and adapted by countries in various parts of the world. So within the toolkit, you can search for different types of legislation and see, are they in place in countries, neighboring countries to you. So this is a useful resource, I think, for member states who may be looking to adopt new types of legislation. But also within, this is the last slide I have at the moment, but within the UNODC early warning advisory on new psychoactive substances, which you can also access here, there is a database of all of this legislation. So we've created this function where it's possible for you to search the different types of legislation, search by region, search by country, search by year, and you can find links within each of the filters to the specific legislation that has been put in place in member states. And then this link actually goes to the law, so you can see the language that has been used. So I think this has been a very useful resource for many countries over the last 8 or 9 years as they look to see what legislation, what legislative options are there available, what other countries are doing, how are they specifically using language for their legislation, but also through the other information that we have within the early warning system about the emergence of substances within countries. Is this legislation appropriate for the situation within my country? Because I think this is the key, and this is important to the map that I showed earlier, is that the situation is different in many countries. So countries need to choose very carefully the language, the legislation that is most appropriate for their case. And with that, I would like to thank you for your attention. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Conor. Incredibly helpful, and I think it feels like a really useful database and resource to have. We'll carry on now to go to the next recorded presentation, but are you able to stay on the line and participate in the discussion afterwards? Fantastic. So that's a recording from Thom Browne from Colombo Plan.
Back in 2010, Colombo Plan started a program testing street drugs worldwide because the composition of street drugs, we found out, had been changing. When I worked at DEA in 1982, I worked on the first fentanyl or synthetic drug epidemic in the US. Back then, whether it was fentanyl, synthetics, or legacy drugs like heroin or cocaine, they were cut 1 or 2 times. If we fast forward to today, we're finding in the US and around the world, it's a more complicated situation where many drugs can be cut up to 20, 21 times. And this makes it difficult to separate these mixtures. When you're analyzing the drugs, it's important to identify every compound in an individual drug sample so you'd have an idea of what's causing overdose or what's causing chronic health problems. And today, based on the analysis that we do this worldwide. We found out in the US about 32% of the street samples we analyzed are cut anywhere from 15 to 21 times. And it's a very complex mixture of multiple fentanyl and fentanyl derivatives, legacy drugs, heroin, cocaine. You also have synthetic cathinones, cannabinoids, and synthetic hallucinogenics in the actual same drug sample. So it's very important to be able to, when you conduct an analysis of these drugs, to conduct analysis of everything that is in that sample called a mixture, so you know what's causing overdose or what's causing health problems on that. And we first started going overseas. We were called down to Brazil and Argentina, where we had people were getting sick from cocaine. But it just wasn't the cocaine. If you conducted a full-scale analysis of everything in that drug sample, it found out there were a bunch of cutting agents, banned pharmaceutical drugs or veterinary drugs that were causing a series of health problems. For instance, street kids in Sao Paulo were 8, 9, 10, 12 years old were experiencing kidney damage, which is very rare and unusual for a kid 12 years old. When analyzing the crack cocaine they were smoking, found out the adulterant or the banned analgesic drug phenacetin was in there. Phenacetin was banned because it causes kidney damage, it depletes red blood cells. And when it was in aspirin in humans in the 1960s, it caused kidney damage over time. But when you had a street kid or someone smoking crack 30 times a day, 7 days a week for months on a time, within a matter of months, they're going to develop kidney damage. So by doing that full-scale analysis, analyzing every drug sample, we're able to tell what was causing kidney damage among street kids in Sao Paulo, Brazil. Likewise, a lot of drug users were getting all sorts of bizarre infections and diseases. The reason was their drugs were also cut with unique adulterants at the time: levamisole, a veterinary dewormer, metamizole, a banned analgesic, and aspirin, the same with aminopyrin, a banned analgesic, banned because they deplete white blood cells. This explained the bizarre infections and diseases that were actually seen. In Ecuador, there was overdose from opioids, but it wasn't fentanyl. They had a brand of heroin called H, and when we went down here to analyze it, the thing that was causing the problems, or the compound causing the problems, was the high blood medication diltiazem. Diltiazem, when combined with heroin or opioids, has a synergistic effect, almost a double depressant effect, that was causing overdose not only in Guayaquil, Ecuador, but in the Northeast United States where it was shipped. And in addition, by analyzing everything in the drug sample, we found out that cocaine was in there too, causing a speedball effect. So it was very necessary to analyze all compounds in the drug sample to understand what causes health problems or what causes overdose and lethality. Also, by doing the full-scale analysis of what's in the street drug sample, we got called to Chicago, Illinois, because in the state of Illinois, the drug users during COVID in Chicago had an unusual high rate of COVID among substance users in Chicago, but not the rest of the state. So by analyzing the drug samples,
Sir, interpreter is asking you to slow down, please.
Okay. By analyzing hundreds of samples, street samples of drugs in the state, we found out that Chicago was unique. There were a number of cutting agents highlighted in yellow that are known to deplete white blood cells. And this did not appear in the rest of the state. And this explained why substance users were suspect to high rates of COVID during the COVID epidemic, because their immune systems were being compromised with white blood cell depletion. In the same way, a lot of our first responders were experiencing problems with administering naloxone. Instead of taking 1 or 2 doses, there were instances where emergency technicians had to administer 5, 6, or 8 doses of naloxone, and it was not an understanding why. But by analyzing all compounds in a street drug sample, we found out that half of the, say, constituents in the drug sample, the sample was cut 20 times, 7 or 8 of them, those compounds, were known to actually affect naloxone administration, requiring more naloxone. So the reason we're able to answer the questions of don't panic because naloxone works, but it's going to take longer because the street drug sample may contain 10 compounds, 5 or 6 of those are known to affect naloxone administration, so it's going to take time. So by doing the full-scale analysis, we're able to determine what was affecting naloxone administration. The same thing applies, not just seized street drugs. We also analyze overdose fluid samples. And we've seen the same thing with the street drugs, where it could be up to 15, 20 compounds in the street drugs. When you analyze the overdose serum of a person who overdosed on drugs, we find the same thing. Multiple legacy drugs, methamphetamine, cocaine, amphetamines, fentanyls, multiple fentanyl compounds, isotonitazine, synthetic opioid. And so we find the same pattern happening. And so part of the program we have, which we call the Sentinel program, it's one thing to analyze what's on the streets in the United States or any other country. So you see drugs are cut 20 times. That's not how it comes in the country. So it's important to look at the borders, how the drug is coming into a country. And we did this with the United States as it come from Mexico into the US. We found out there's maybe 3, 4, 5 compounds, say, in a fentanyl pill sample. The importance of doing the full-scale analysis and identifying everything, it's accepted that fentanyl is lethal at 2 milligrams. However, these samples are not 2 milligrams, they're 1 milligram or less. But why would this be lethal? Why would it cause overdose? It's because the compounds highlighted in yellow are known to potentiate opioids like heroin and fentanyl, making them more potent. So a 1 milligram fentanyl sample, say that's cut with metamizole, levamisole, xylazine, and limited amounts of parafourfentanyl, is more lethal than a 2 milligram dose. So this redefines what is lethality, what's a lethal dose. So that's why it's very important to analyze every compound in the actual drug sample to find out, even though this fentanyl pill is under 1 milligram, it is still highly lethal because these adulterants or cutting agents in there basically will actually potentiate that and make fentanyl more lethal. So what we've done with a lot of countries will have GCMS machines to add equipment to analyze drugs. However, if you have a complex mixture of 15, 10, 21 compounds in a drug sample, GCMS is not likely to separate all those. So it's important to use a technique that could, an analysis technique in a machine that can identify and separate all compounds in a drug mixture and also do the quantification on that so you can determine potency, lethality enough. So what we do, we train on LCMS machines and LCMS technology. Because these machines will detect everything in a complex mixture in a drug sample. So, and also will quantify. So you'll have a better idea of what's causing overdose and severe health problems. When we conducted training in the United States, we conducted at a lab with NMS labs in Willow Grove, Pennsylvania. One unique aspect that they have hundreds of street samples from the United States, have complex mixtures that have caused overdose. We divide them into samples that cause fatal overdose like these, or samples that cause non-fatal overdose. We have them in wholesale, retail quantities. We have them in kilo bricks, liquids. We have them in powders, in pills. So basically anything that say caused an overdose worldwide, we have all those different mixtures of drugs, that actual samples that can be tested on, and not only seized drug samples, but the overdose fluids. We have hundreds of overdose fluids that cause overdose. So we can train people on both identifying everything in an overdose fluid and everything in a seized drug sample to better identify what caused overdose death and what's causing severe health problems. And in that we had, we had trained in the United States, report Jordan, to basically develop techniques to find out everything that's in a Captagon sample. We've trained Brazil, South Korea, United Kingdom, Philippines, in the US. We've gone overseas and trained in Guatemala, Honduras, Argentina, Brazil, Sri Lanka, South Africa on how to detect everything in a seized drug sample or overdose fluid, so you can have a better idea of what's driving overdose and causing health problems in the country. And what we also do is to help get the word out. We also help the countries develop public health alerts based on what's found. For the adulterants, unique adulterants like phenacetin that causes kidney failure, or levamisole that depletes white blood cells, when we do the public health alerts, we have a panel of medical doctors that develops what we call a medical flow diagram that lets treatment and public health professionals know how to diagnose exposure to an adulterant like phenacetin and how to treat it. And also with the seized drug samples, what we'll do, if it's something new, like a new synthetic opioid, like a nitazene, isotonidazine, in the alert, we will put in there ways that you can detect it in both seized drug samples and overdose fluid. But the key that we found out is because the pattern of drugs has changed worldwide, especially the actual cutting of drugs, where we can see up to 15, 20 compounds in a sample. It's necessary to use an LCMS analysis to test for all of this. Thank you.
Thom,